Hey guys! Tonight we're slipping quietly into the warm, loom-scented shadows of ancient Lydia, a land of soft hills, stubborn goats, and stringently competitive weaving contests. The stars are blinking lazily overhead, the air smells like carded wool and pomegranate wine, and if you listen closely, you might hear the hush-hush click of shuttle against thread. Someone's working late again. You, for better or worse, are a traveler here. You've somehow wandered into this dusty little town just before dawn. The sky's still navy blue. A sleepy dog flops over beside a temple column. A fig seller snores next to his cart. And all around you, the city of Colophon yawns and stretches. But there's a buzz in the air, a kind of soft, weaving-based tension. Everyone's talking about a girl who might have done something very, very unwise. You'll meet her soon enough. But first, let's be honest. You probably wouldn't survive 5 minutes here. Between the open sewer gutters, the aggressive, sacred geese, and the constant pressure to know your place in the cosmic pecking order, you'd be a goner before your morning barley cake. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. I love seeing how far this little bedtime caravan travels. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself meandering toward the city center. There's no traffic, unless you count a very smug goat, and you're trying to stay awake, only half succeeding. That's when you hear it. The rhythmic whisper of thread through a loom. It's hypnotic. You follow the sound like it's calling, to you, and it leads you to a small stone workshop tucked between 2 olive trees. Inside, a girl, young, maybe 17, hair tied back in a practical knot, hands dancing like music over warp and weft. Her fingers move so fast it's almost funny. You squint. That tapestry she's working on? Wait a minute. Are those? Yep. That's a depiction of Zeus turning into a swan. You blush. Bold choice. Her name is Arachne. And if you didn't know any better, you'd think she was just a really gifted local artisan with too much free time and 0 filters. But no. Arachne is the reason gods are gossiping. She's the reason temple priests are nervously rereading their hymns. Because she's done something outrageous. She's weaving better than Athena. Well, that's the rumor anyway. You lean against the door frame, pretending not to eavesdrop, but it's not exactly subtle. Townswomen pass by, whispering, "Have you seen her latest? The shading on Poseidon's trident? I mean, come on!" Others mutter with disapproval. "It's not natural. That kind of detail, it's indecent." You hear the phrase divine challenge, tossed around like olive pits at a picnic. Historically, we know that weaving wasn't just idle housework, it was power. In the ancient Mediterranean world, textiles were currency, status, inheritance, even diplomacy. Women didn't run the agora, but they ran the loom rooms, and that mattered more than you'd think. Arachne's family isn't exactly noble. Her father dyes wool, splashing about in vats of murky purple sludge all day. He comes home smelling like fermented snails and triumph. The Tyrian purple trade was a whole thing. Trust me, don't Google the smell. But Arachne? She took that, dyed thread, and started doing things with it that had old widows blinking twice and priests silently crossing themselves. No one taught her. At least, that's what she says. That's what gets people whispering the loudest. See, in a world where everything good is supposed to come from the gods, saying, "I learned it myself," is practically begging for divine intervention. It's like building a paper airplane that flies better than an F-16 and then mailing a photo of it to the Air Force. You pause in the workshop doorway, watching her finish the corner of a tapestry. It's depicting the wedding of Thetis and Peleus. Classic mythological content, tasteful nudity, a few bitter sea gods in the background for spice. It's exquisite. The kind of work that makes you feel like you're there, holding a goblet. awkwardly pretending not to notice Zeus flirting with yet another nymph. But what really gets you is how calm she is. Arachne doesn't look smug. She's not showing off. She's just doing it, as if weaving a near-perfect portrayal of divine betrayal into linen is just something you do between breakfast and lunch, and that's the problem, isn't it? Historians still argue whether this myth was a cautionary tale about pride or about talent. Was Arachne a warning to mortal women who reached too far? Or a thinly veiled critique of divine egos and insecure immortals? The sources don't exactly agree. Ovid, that ancient tea spiller, gave us the juiciest version in his Metamorphoses, but even that account leaves room for interpretation. One fringe theory, gather round sleepy scholars, is that Arachne's myth was retroactively constructed to justify the weirdly spider-heavy omens in Greek households. You know, "Oh no, there's a spider in my lentils. It must be a sign from the gods." Ancient superstition was like that. Oddly specific. Back in Lydia, a chicken clucks somewhere. A fig falls from a tree. You shift your weight and catch the girl's eye. She gives you a look that says, "Yes, I see you standing there. No, I'm not stopping." Then she adds a new section to the tapestry. A satyr trying not to spill wine while dancing. It's weirdly relatable. As dawn begins to stretch over the tiled rooftops, the loom falls silent. Arachne stands and stretches. Her father calls for breakfast. Somewhere far above on Mount Olympus, someone has been watching, and she is not amused. You wake to the smell of warm bread and the soft plodding of goats. The sky over Colophon is a faded watercolor of rose and slate blue, and Arachne's workshop is already back in motion. Her father, a broad-shouldered man with permanently purple-stained hands, waves you off with a half-smile and a muttered prayer to Hermes for not loitering near his dye pots. Fair enough, you follow your nose toward breakfast, trying not to trip on a sleeping tortoise. The market's alive now. Vendors hawking, barley cakes, olives on strings, sour cheese wrapped in fig leaves. Everyone's talking about Arachne again. But today the tone is different. Quieter, warier. "She said it to my face," a woman mutters, tucking pomegranates into her basket. "That she never needed Athena, that she learned it herself." A child nearby fakes a thunderclap noise and cackles. A passing priest gives him the kind of look that turns you into a model citizen in 2 seconds flat. You take your barley cake and drift back toward Arachne's workshop. Something's shifted. Her latest tapestry now hangs outside for all the world to see. This one's sharper, less celebratory, less dreamy and more, well, pointed. It shows a mortal woman, a clear stand-in for Arachne herself, surrounded by nymphs, gods, beasts. She's holding a spindle like a sword. The divine figures around her look uncomfortable. One or two are clearly scowling. There's a message here. And you don't need a degree in semiotics to guess what it is. Arachne isn't just weaving pictures anymore. She's weaving commentary. Now, for context, weaving in the ancient world was more than decoration. Tapestries told stories. They carried messages, religious warnings, family crests, declarations of power. And if you were skilled enough to make your thread whisper things the temple couldn't say aloud, well, you were dangerous. By the third tapestry, Arachne has become something like a local legend and a minor crisis. The Temple of Athena, usually a sleepy spot for fresh garlands and the occasional goat sacrifice, now has a cluster of extremely concerned priestesses on watch. Not that they say they're watching, but you know. The fringe tidbit here, literally and metaphorically, is that in some lesser-known versions of the myth, Arachne didn't just outweave Athena. She invented new weaving techniques entirely, like spiral backing and triple shadowing. Historians still argue whether this detail comes from later Roman interpretations or was simply added by really enthusiastic Renaissance painters. Meanwhile, the whispers continue. She said it again, someone says at the fountain, in front of the olive merchant, that her hands are worth more than divine blessing. You peek around the fountain. It's the usual gossip crowd, older women washing grapes and peeling gossip like onions. She didn't even thank the gods, one of them says, scandalized. But what if she's right? Another whispers, eyes darting around. What if it really is her own gift? Now here's the rub. In ancient Greek culture, hubris isn't just arrogance. It's cosmic misbehavior. It's what happens when mortals forget their place and the divine order gets miffed. Think of it like the universe's way of swatting your wrist with a cosmic wooden spoon. And Arachne? She's stirring the celestial stew pot with a big old ladle. You wander back to her loom. She's sitting again, this time working faster, tighter. You notice she's added an odd little detail. A small golden spider nestled in a corner of the tapestry. Almost hidden. Almost like a signature. You glance upward, instinctively. Somewhere far above, Olympus watches. Now, whether Athena truly heard, the rumors herself or was informed by divine grapevine, which, let's be honest, is probably just Apollo being dramatic, is up for debate. But the general consensus? She knows. And she's coming. You sit by the loom, careful not to touch anything, and Arachne sighs without looking up. They say I'm tempting fate, she murmurs. But isn't that what fate wants? A little tug now and then? It's hard to argue. With that, the loom clacks. The thread sings. Meanwhile, in the mythology department, scholars still can't decide if this early part of the tale was meant to paint Arachne as admirable or foolish. Some say she's a tragic hero, brave in the face of a jealous goddess. Others call her a warning, a fabric worker who bit the hand that strung the universe together. One fringe group, shout out to the more dramatic interpretive schools, believes Arachne represents political rebellion, that her myth arose during a time when commoners were quietly poking fun at aristocrats through coded craftwork, hidden messages in textiles, subversive cats embroidered next to names of unpopular magistrates. It sounds silly, but stranger things have fueled revolutions. As the sun climbs higher, you feel it. That stillness before something tips. Arachne's fingers don't pause, but her shoulders are tense. There's a quiet to her workshop now, like it knows it's being watched. And you? You can't help but feel like you're sitting beside someone who just dared a thunderstorm to blink first. Outside, a child runs past, shouting something about a stranger on the road. Someone cloaked, hooded, with a staff of olive wood and a look that makes chickens go quiet. Oh, good. Company. The sun dips a little lower in the sky, casting long, peach-colored shadows over Colophon. You can feel the hush settle in again, like a whole town holding its breath. Word spreads fast in a place like this, faster than the temple incense wafting, on the breeze, faster than rumor carried on a baker's elbow. "She's here," someone whispers. A cloaked woman enters the square, moving slowly, staff tapping, bare feet, her robes the color of worn parchment, and the wind doesn't so much touch her as part respectfully around her. There's something off. You can't place it. Her eyes are too sharp, her shoulders too proud for a beggar. But her face is lined, sun-worn, and her hair is streaked with gray. She looks like someone who's seen too much and still didn't get thanked for it. She walks right past the market stalls, ignoring the vendors, ignoring the sheep, even ignoring the temple itself. That alone is enough to make one old man drop his figs. She goes straight for the workshop, for Arachne. Inside, the girl's still weaving. You hold your breath as the old woman enters. Doesn't speak, just watches. After a moment, she says softly, "Your work is remarkable." Arachne glances up. Thank you. Then, because she's Arachne and tact is for the less talented, she adds, even the gods couldn't do better. Oh dear. The woman steps closer. Perhaps you should thank them anyway, for giving you such a gift. Arachne's hands pause. Just a flicker. No one gave me anything, she says. There it is, the line that cracks the air in two. In some versions of the myth, the stranger tries to warn her, says something like, be humble, girl. The gods do not take kindly to comparisons. In other tellings, the disguise drops immediately and the storm comes crashing through. But this version? This one simmers. The old woman leans in, lowering her voice. What if I told you, she says, that the gods are not so far away as you think? Arachne straightens, and in that heartbeat of silence, something shifts in the room. The woman steps back, and then, no thunderclap, no lightning bolt, just a slow shimmer, like heat on a road. The lines of her face soften, the robes melt into white and gold. Her eyes flash with something both warm and terrible. It's her, Athena, goddess of wisdom, of war, of weaving, standing in Arachne's dusty little workshop, next to the half-finished tapestry of divine scandals, looking unimpressed. The goats outside bleat. One promptly faints. You wisely take a small step back. Arachne doesn't flinch, not even a little. She meets the goddess's gaze like someone who's been preparing for this exact moment her whole life. Athena speaks, and her voice is like silk being torn in slow motion. If you are so confident, she says, then let us weave. You and one final contest. If you win, your name will live forever. If you lose, well, you won't. Not exactly a warm invitation to brunch. Still, Arachne agrees. Instantly. No hesitation. Now for you, this might feel like a bad idea, like yelling at a volcano or challenging a cat to a staring contest. But in ancient stories, contests like this were a kind of sacred theater. Mortals stepping onto a divine stage with consequences stitched into every scene. They set up two looms side by side. Athena starts first, weaving a majestic scene, the gods on Olympus in all their shimmering power. At the center, herself in full armor, eyes glowing, justice in her hands. Around the border, mortals who had dared to defy the gods and lost. You recognize some of them. Niobe, who boasted of her children, Pentheus, who mocked Dionysus, each punishment more creative than the last. It's impressive. No, it's stunning. The kind of craftsmanship that makes you want to never try anything again, ever, because perfection has already been achieved and signed in golden thread. Then Arachne begins. And what she weaves, well, it's a little spicier. Her tapestry tells. The same myths, but from a different angle. Zeus seducing Leda as a swan, Europa abducted by bull form, Poseidon chasing mortals through the sea foam. Her threadwork is flawless. Her colors sharper than nature. But the story it tells, it's a mirror, a challenge. She's not worshipping. She's questioning. Historians still argue whether this moment was meant as satire or defiance. Was Arachne trying to expose hypocrisy, or simply showing off? Some say her work revealed divine cruelty. Others say she was just too young to know when to stay quiet. And here's the fringe tidbit. Certain vase paintings discovered centuries later show mortal women at looms with animal-headed figures peering over their shoulders. Some scholars wonder if this was a nod to Arachne's challenge, an echo of her myth stitched into household art for generations. Because even if you disagreed with her, you couldn't ignore her. Back in the workshop, the tapestries are complete. The people who've, crept in to watch don't dare speak. Even the goats are holding their breath. Athena steps forward to examine Arachne's work. And for a moment, a long, terrifying, beautiful moment, she says nothing. Then her lip curls. It is flawless, she says. Too flawless. And she tears it. Not gently, not ceremonially. She rips the tapestry from the loom, slashing through days of work, unraveling the stories like spilled secrets. Arachne's face goes pale. Athena turns, eyes full of storm. "You dared to mock the gods! You dared to show us this!" The room crackles with fury, and just like that, everything changes. The air thickens. You feel it settle on your skin like static, like you've rubbed your arm on the edge of a lightning bolt. Arachne doesn't move. She just stares at the shredded remains of her masterpiece, lips pressed tight, hands clenched, like she's trying to hold on to the last thread of pride. Athena is silent now. Not the quiet of peace, but the quiet before something breaks. You know, in some retellings, this is the part where the goddess unleashes a thunderclap or turns someone into a pile of olives. But not here. This is quieter, more personal. Arachne looks up, eyes blazing, not scared, angry, and then suddenly, all the fire is gone. Her whole posture drops like a loom collapsing inward. Her hands fall to her sides. And there, in that terrifying stillness, she walks away from the loom, no tantrum, no argument. Just the unbearable weight of everything she had built, torn apart by a single divine judgment. She walks to the corner of the room, ties her long hair into a loose knot with a scrap of thread, and begins to climb. There's a rafter beam. Low. Strong and far too convenient. You realize what she's doing just as she pulls the thread taut. It's the kind of moment that history books tend to skip, smoothing out the human mess with a polite ellipsis. But the myths, the older versions, they don't flinch. Yes, Arachne tries to hang herself, and that's when Athena steps in. Not with a soft word or a helping hand. No, she steps in like a god would, terrifying, final, and impossibly transformative. In a flash of gold and fury, the goddess reaches out, doesn't undo the thread, doesn't offer comfort. Instead, she transforms Arachne, body, mind, motion, into something else entirely. A spider. Small, nimble, eternally spinning. It's one of those myths where the moral isn't quite clear. Is it punishment? Mercy? A second chance? Historians still argue whether Athena's act was cruel or kind. Some versions say the goddess was moved by pity and gave Arachne the ability to weave forever. Others claim it was a final act of dominance, stripping her of pride, but forcing her to continue in a lesser form. You watch, dazed, as Arachne's limbs shrink and multiply. Her skin darkens. Her eyes widen, cluster. She becomes faster, lighter, drawn toward corners and ceilings. She scurries across the beam with a grace that's both horrifying and beautiful, then pauses, spins, spins. The thread emerges smooth, perfect, glinting with impossible precision. Even now, her weaving is flawless. A silence falls over the room, a deep, almost sacred quiet. Athena watches her creation, the not-quite-mortal girl turned eternal spinner. You think you catch a flicker of something on the goddess's face. Regret? Pride? Both? Neither? She turns on her heel and vanishes. Just gone. Like morning mist under a summer sun. The room remains still. Outside, the villagers haven't moved. You hear one woman whisper, "Is she dead?" "No," murmurs another, pointing up. "She's changed." And sure enough, there in the corner of the workshop, a web begins to grow. Intricate. Precise. More beautiful than anything human fingers could have made. You blink and catch the golden glint of thread. She's still at it. Now here's a curious thing. Ancient Greeks hated spiders. Seriously, you'd think this myth would have made them sacred. But nope. To them, spiders were weird, eerie creatures, dwellers in dust and corners. But they also represented fate. The Moirai, the fates themselves, were spinners. Life, thread, time, they were all bound together by something you couldn't see but definitely couldn't escape. And so, the myth endures, not just as a don't mess with the gods cautionary tale, but as a strange, tangled metaphor. One fringe theory, popular with the more poetic scholars, suggests that Arachne didn't lose at all, that she won in the only way a mortal can, by becoming something untouchable, outside of divine politics, beyond worship, the eternal artisan, quietly spinning her truth forever, no matter who watches. And you? You sit in the now empty workshop, wondering what story the web will tell next. Time passes strangely here. Hours slip past like thread through fingers. Eventually, you get up. Step outside. The light has shifted. Evening has arrived without asking. The town is quieter now. The gossip's gone soft. People are walking slower, like they've witnessed something ancient and aren't quite ready to admit it. You notice little webs in the corners of doorways, in baskets, between fig trees. You wonder if Arachne's children are watching. Oh, and here's a detail they never mention in textbooks. In some obscure temple friezes, long since faded, there's a carved image of Athena holding a spindle. And behind her, on her shoulder, a tiny spider glinting with gold. It's almost affectionate. Almost. Night has settled fully now, warm and velvety, the way it only gets in these myth-haunted corners of the world. The stars blink lazily overhead, unconcerned. Somewhere a cicada tunes up, possibly off-key. You walk slowly through Colophon, half expecting Athena to appear again in another disguise. Maybe she's the goat you just passed. Maybe she's the woman selling olives who gave you that suspiciously knowing look. But tonight, the story still clings to you like cobwebs on your sleeve. It's not finished unraveling yet, because Arachne, spider or not, started something. You may not know this, but weaving in the ancient world wasn't just a hobby. It was practically sorcery. The loom was a sacred object. To weave was to imitate the gods. Every strand mirrored the lines of fate, and the weavers, usually women, were seen as keepers of hidden knowledge. Their patterns told stories, transmitted culture, wrapped newborns, clothed the dead. A piece of cloth could carry meaning more quietly than a library scroll. In Arachne's time, weaving was work, but also power. And now? Now you begin to notice something odd, more and more myths involving women and thread. Penelope weaving and unweaving at her loom while waiting for Odysseus. The fates, of course, spinning lives like spools of yarn. Even Ariadne giving Theseus a ball of thread to navigate the labyrinth. It's as if thread itself was a kind of divine weapon, not loud, not flashy, but in the right hands, stronger than swords. Historians still argue whether this was intentional, whether Greek myth coded thread as feminine agency on purpose, or if it just sort of happened, the way patterns always emerge when you're not looking for them. But the pattern is there, undeniable. The loom isn't just furniture, it's narrative, and after Arachne, that narrative changed. Suddenly, we see more stories of goddesses and mortal women creating, not just suffering, not just being pursued or punished, but making something. Take, for instance, the obscure but oddly delightful figure of Philomela. You might have heard of her. She's the one whose voice was taken, literally tongue cut out, and yet she still managed to tell her story. How? Not by yelling, not by war. She wove it, a tapestry so vivid, so furious, that it told the truth, without a single word. Think about that. She lost her ability to speak and still created a form of speech that couldn't be silenced. It's kind of metal, if we're honest, but also deeply poetic. And here's your quirky tidbit. In a few early mosaics from Asia Minor, Philomela is shown not just weaving her story, but teaching others. A sort of underground school of loom-based rebellion. Could it be a historical echo of something real? Secret weaving circles? Who knows? Scholars raise their eyebrows. Theories tangle, threads dangle. And there, in the background of it all, skitters the shadow of Arachne. Not gone, just changed. It's tempting to see her as a cautionary tale. Be humble. Don't challenge the gods. That's the party line, right? But you're starting to feel like that version's a little too clean, like a tapestry with all the messy bits tucked in the back. Because what if the lesson isn't don't challenge power, but know what you're weaving into the world? Arachne didn't get turned into a spider because she was bad at weaving. She got turned because her weaving told the truth, a truth the gods didn't like. And instead of staying silent, she dared to make it beautiful. That's dangerous and powerful. Back in the present moment, you look up and notice something strange. A spider web stretched perfectly between two olive branches, and inside, faintly. Glowing in the moonlight, the pattern looks familiar. Almost like a goddess in armor, or maybe a girl with a loom. Hard to say. Your eyes are getting heavy. A gentle wind stirs the trees. The air smells like warm fig leaves and wool. There's something reassuring about the idea that no matter what, someone is always weaving. Quietly, unseen, turning stories into thread. Maybe it's Arachne. Maybe it's someone else now. But the loom hasn't stopped. And maybe it never will. So now you know the bones of the story, how Arachne spun too close to the divine sun, got burned, and then became something stranger. But here's the thing. Myths don't stay still. Like a good web, they're always catching new meanings. Tonight, as you rest your head, we follow the thread even further into how this one myth rippled across time, getting tangled up in art, politics, and oddly persistent spider anxieties. Let's start with the Romans. Because, of course, the Romans couldn't leave a Greek myth alone. They had to remix it. When Ovid wrote his Metamorphoses, he painted Arachne's story in full technicolor tragedy, right down to the part where she's described as hanging by a thread before her transformation. Classic Ovid, melodramatic, a little morbid, and clearly on Team Arachne. Historians still argue whether Ovid meant this as subtle criticism of the Roman Empire's divine absolutism. Was Athena standing in for a ruler who couldn't handle artistic dissent? Or was he just indulging in poetic flair and a good, juicy spider origin story? Either way, his version stuck. For centuries, it was the definitive Arachne. Fast forward to the Renaissance. Yes, we're leaping a bit. And suddenly Arachne's popping up in oil paintings, tapestries, and the occasional awkward fresco. Diego Velázquez even painted a piece called Las Hilanderas, the Spinners, which shows a quiet workshop of women weaving, while in the background, the story of Arachne and Athena unfolds like a tapestry within a tapestry. It's a subtle nudge. Look closer. There's more here than meets the eye. But what's even weirder? In some versions, Athena is the one who commissions these later works. Imagine that. A goddess trying to curate her own PR, commissioning rebranded art to soften the mythic blow. Oh no, she says, sipping divine tea. We had a creative disagreement. I respected her talent truly. Sure, Athena. And meanwhile, poor Arachne becomes a symbol, not just of pride, but of defiant creativity, of what it means to speak truth through craft, even when it bites back. Let's not forget the spiders. There's an entire thread, pun intended, of folklore across Europe and the Near East, where spiders are either bad omens or secret messengers. Some villages would burn spider webs to ward off spirits. Others would preserve them in lockets for luck. In parts of Anatolia, there's a legend that spiders taught humans to write by spinning letters in their webs. That's right, spiders. Those eight-legged basement gremlins were once thought of as tutors of language. You imagine a very small, very smug spider in round glasses tapping a tiny pointer against a dewdrop-covered web and correcting your grammar. And here's a fun, if slightly eerie fringe detail. There's an ancient inscription on a loom weight from Boeotia, somewhere around the 5th century BCE, that simply reads, "For the girl who shamed a goddess, no name, no context." But scholars suspect it's a nod to Arachne. A warning? A tribute? Hard to say. But it suggests her story lingered long after the temple walls crumbled. By now, Arachne wasn't just a cautionary tale. She was folklore's stealth heroine, the underdog, the original don't mess with the artist figure. It's wild, really. One myth about a loom and a divine temper tantrum snowballs into centuries of debate, reinterpretation, and more than a few awkward school plays featuring very confused children in spider costumes. And then, there's science. Did you know the genus name for orb-weaving spiders is Araneus? That's not a coincidence. It's a Latin nod to Arachne's name. Even scientists, in their lab-coated objectivity, couldn't resist pulling a thread from the old myth. So now, tucked into your backyard or your window corners, are little living tributes to that girl from Colophon. Quietly spinning, unbothered by divine drama, creating intricate masterpieces from nothing but silk and instinct. It's oddly comforting. You lean back, imagining one of those spiders now, crafting a web like a sleepy mandala. Maybe it tells a story too, one you're just not fluent in yet. The room around you grows stiller, quieter. Just the occasional hum of the fan, the rustle of fabric as you shift slightly under the covers. Outside, a moth brushes softly against the screen, oblivious to the myth unfolding inside. And tonight, you're realizing Arachne didn't just change the way people told stories, she changed what stories were about. See, after Arachne, more myths started to sneak in themes of art as resistance, creation as commentary. Suddenly, it wasn't just heroes. Swinging swords or gods hurling lightning bolts, there were people making things. And the things they made mattered. You probably wouldn't expect it, but even in ancient Mesopotamia, weaving was a divine affair. The goddess Utu, another spider-themed deity, mind you, was considered the weaver of fates. She wasn't quite as dramatic as Athena, but still her job was essentially to tangle or untangle the threads of destiny. Neat, right? And in some dusty Sumerian tablets, there's a whisper of a tale where Utu is warned not to trust another god, Enki, and instead weaves herself a protective web so intricate no one can cross it without her say-so. Historians still argue whether Utu and Arachne are distant mythological cousins, two sides of the same silky coin, or if cultures just independently gave spiders a VIP seat in their symbolic roster. But one thing's for sure, that weaving ox power trope, it's global and very, very sticky. You blink slowly. The idea of fate being made of thread has a certain gentle finality to it, doesn't it? You can picture it, your life stretched out in soft skeins, some smooth, some knotted, all of it looping quietly on an invisible loom somewhere beyond the stars. And speaking of stars, let's take a cosmic detour, because even constellations get in on the Arachne action. There's a lesser-known star group, tiny, faint, that some Renaissance astronomers once dubbed Aranea, the spider. It never became an official constellation, but a few hand-drawn maps from the 17th century show a curled web shape nestled between Leo and Cancer. Just a little tribute, floating forever above Mediterranean rooftops. It's not quite the glory of Orion's belt, but hey, symbolic spiders take what they can get. Meanwhile, back on Earth, the thread keeps winding its way through culture. Let's pause for a quirky tidbit. In 12th century northern Italy, there was a weaving guild where apprentices weren't allowed to speak for their first 3 months. Instead, they had to show everything they learned through the threads they wove. If you messed up the warp or let the shuttle lag, it showed in the fabric, like a stutter in the cloth. Only after that silent apprenticeship could they ask questions. Weaving, as language again. You can't help but wonder what Arachne would have thought of that. Would she be proud? Offended? Maybe a little smug? She did try to warn everyone how much a tapestry could say when words failed. And here's the best part. The story never really stopped mutating. During the Enlightenment, Arachne got repackaged once again. This time, she was a symbol of reason. That's right. Some thinkers argued her feud with Athena wasn't about hubris at all, but about fact versus faith. Arachne, they claimed, represented the rational, detail-focused eye. Athena? Myth, tradition, the official version of history. So the story became a metaphor for the age-old question. Do we believe what we're told, or do we look closer? Of course, historians still argue whether that's a massive overread or just the inevitable evolution of a really juicy myth. But either way, the web keeps growing, and so does Arachne. By the 19th century, women writers in Europe were quietly reclaiming her. In poems, essays, and diary entries, Arachne began showing up as a patron saint of creative frustration, the overlooked genius, the punished artist, a favorite among ladies who were, let's be honest, very tired of being told to smile and embroider napkins. One obscure poet, Anne Radcliffe, yes, the same Radcliffe who basically invented Gothic fiction, once scrawled in the margin of a draft. Arachne smiled. She knows the goddess was wrong. It's a small sentence, but it lands like thunder. You imagine that smile now. Small, wry, maybe a little bitter, but still spinning, still here. As you lie there, nestled into your pillow, the threads of Arachne's story continue to spool out across time. You're probably not surprised anymore that a single myth could weave its way into everything from astronomy to silent apprenticeships. But here's where things get even stranger, in a delightfully sleepy sort of way. Arachne didn't just become a symbol, she became a lens. Through her story, people began asking, what does it mean to be punished for talent? And more intriguingly, who gets to decide what kind of art is allowed? Which brings us rather unexpectedly to the Byzantine Empire. Yes, we're skipping a few centuries forward, but don't worry. We're still surrounded by gold mosaics, incense-scented halls, and emperors with surprisingly good jewel collections. In the early 9th century, the Byzantine court was knee-deep in iconoclasm, the controversial movement to ban and destroy religious images. Painters, weavers, and artisans were suddenly on the front lines of a cultural battlefield. And tucked into a few letters from the period, letters passed secretly among monastic circles, was a curious reference. Beware the fate of the spider girl. No name, no context. But clearly someone remembered Arachne. Historians still argue whether that phrase was a warning to artists not to challenge authority or a wink, an encouragement to keep weaving truth even if it risked divine fury. Either way, the myth had made it into the shadowy corridors of power, where gold thread and fear often mingled. And yet outside the palace walls, weaving continued. Quietly. Persistently. In Greek villages, old women would still spin tales of a young girl who dared to challenge a goddess, except now she didn't always get turned into a spider. Sometimes they'd say she just disappeared into the hills, weaving tapestries so beautiful that the gods eventually gave up trying to stop her. You smile. That version feels nicer somehow. Cozier. And while we're talking cozy, here's a delightfully odd tidbit from 16th century Germany. A group of nuns at a convent in Nuremberg were obsessed with spiders, not in a creepy way, but a symbol of silent devotion kind of way. They kept pet spiders, really, let them spin webs in the chapel corners, and referred to them as the Sisters of Thread. In one surviving convent manual, a note reads, "Let the spider dwell, for she weaves as the Lord commands." Arachne would have approved, or rolled her many eyes. Even more fascinating, some of those webs were preserved, pressed into vellum like delicate lace. You can still see them in a museum archive today. Tiny, dusty spider tapestries, not unlike the mythical one Arachne herself once wove. It's funny, isn't it? This strange respect for something most people swat away without thinking. But that's the point. The Arachne myth makes you look again, at the small, the quiet, the overlooked, at what art can be when no one's watching. And just as Arachne's myth threads through religion and resistance, it also burrows into fairy tales. In northern France, there's a folk tale about a girl named Lynette who spins golden thread faster than anyone in the village. When a jealous countess challenges her to a weaving duel, yes, apparently that was a thing, the girl wins, and the countess throws a tantrum so spectacular that she accidentally curses herself to the shape of the crawl. That's code for spider. Same idea, different packaging. And you know what's extra odd? In this version, the spider gets the house. That's right. The magical cottage where the weaving duel took place becomes the spider's permanent
world
residence.
outside your window is calm,
with webs over every doorway,
but your mind is
and
still
little
tracing
thread
those
spools
threads,
tucked in the rafters,
finding the connections between the weavings of the past
if you squint,
and the quiet spaces
the point
we inhabit
is,
now.
the tale keeps
It's
shifting,
as if somehow
adapting,
all of Arachne's
spiraling out
intricate
into
patterns
cultures you'd
have
never expect,
seeped into the fabric of
Sometimes
our own
it's a
lives,
warning,
woven into the stories
sometimes
we
it's a
tell,
secret
the
badge of
things we
honor.
make, and even the
Sometimes
way
it's
we
just an
view our
excuse
own
to let a
struggles.
spider live rent-free in your windowsill.
Speaking of struggles,
You shift
let's talk about
gently
one
under
that
the
might
covers,
seem
a little
far
more
removed
aware
from Greek
now of the
mythology,
quiet corners
yet
around
somehow
you'll see the
not
connection.
scared. Just
We're venturing into the
thoughtful.
world of the Victorian
Somewhere,
era. Something might
yes,
be spinning.
the 19th century,
Making something beautiful,
a time
whether
of
the
dark
gods
alleys,
like it or not.
gas lamps, and the occasional poetic but awkwardly embarrassing love affair.
But also a time when the idea of the artist as tortured genius started to gain serious traction. Enter the artistically disillusioned Victorians. The mid-1800s were a time of cultural upheaval. The Industrial Revolution had created an era of great advances, but also the overwhelming feeling that something essential was being lost. People began to turn inward to question what they were creating and why. And in that fevered search for answers, many turned to myth, specifically to Arachne. For the Victorians, Arachne's defiance wasn't just about hubris or divine punishment. It was a reflection of their own growing sense of frustration. The rapid pace of change in society felt like a looming threat to the slower, quieter art forms, the kinds of works that required patience, introspection, and, of course, time. In some circles, Arachne came to symbolize the artist caught in the web of progress, struggling to maintain artistic integrity while surrounded by a world that demanded more speed, more production, more spectacle. Arachne was the perfect archetype for this new age of creative frustration. The phrase "spinning webs of discontent" was even coined around this time. People began to see themselves in her, trapped in an ever-expanding web of societal demands and creative pressures. Should they weave faster? Should they create more? Or should they hold on to their ideals, no matter the consequences? It's not hard to imagine how this struck a chord. And from these themes emerged some of the most famous works of the Victorian era, like the poetry of Christina Rossetti, who was all too familiar with the pain of feeling misunderstood as a creator. One of her poems, The Goblin Market, carries the same haunting air of Arachne's myth. Rossetti's portrayal of temptation, the complicated nature of art, and the consequences of giving in echoes the original story of the weaver and the goddess. You can almost picture the weavers of the day, those weary souls in their cluttered studios battling to finish their intricate tapestries before the world swept them aside for the next shiny thing. Arachne's name became synonymous with a kind of quiet defiance. I refused to sell out to the latest trend. It wasn't about rebellion for the sake of it. It was about holding on to the art that meant something to you. Even if the world around you, whether Victorian or modern, wasn't so sure. Interestingly, some artists began to reclaim Arachne's story in their works. John William Waterhouse, the famed pre-Raphaelite painter, captured Arachne in one of his paintings from 1892, where she's seen in the midst of her fateful weaving duel with Athena. The painter made sure to frame her as not just a victim, but a protagonist. The contrast between the two figures, the goddess with her stoic, godly presence and Arachne with her fiery focus, was both a visual representation of the battle between divine power and human spirit, but also a nod to how women in the art world were challenging the standards of the day. It's almost like, after centuries of being punished for her defiance, Arachne was finally being granted a place in the artistic Hall of Fame. If only she could have been in the room to appreciate it, and this wasn't just some romanticizing of Arachne by the Victorians. In some social circles, she became an almost cult-like figure, especially among women's groups who were advocating for greater rights and visibility. The weaving, the creativity, the defiance, she became the embodiment of the female artist asserting her right to create, to exist outside the confines of domestic expectation. Arachne's web, once a symbol of punishment, now spun as a banner of feminist solidarity. Not to get too deep into modern politics, I know it's late and I don't want to wake you, but it's fascinating to think how Arachne, this small, long-forgotten character, emerged as an enduring symbol of rebellion, creation, and resistance in the face of overwhelming odds. Perhaps even today, she still speaks to those in creative fields who feel trapped in their own webs. It's as if she was quietly reminding them, no matter how tangled it gets, your thread still matters. Maybe that's the greatest twist in her story. That Arachne's final fate, no matter how sad, tragic, or surreal, was never really the end. It was only the beginning of a much larger, never-ending narrative. Now you're drifting in the quiet of your room, perhaps a little lost in thought, but with a sense of peace, knowing that Arachne's thread is still weaving, still spinning, somewhere beyond time. As you lie there, the soft pull of sleep beginning to settle over you, there's something comforting in the idea that Arachne's story doesn't just end in the past. Her myth has managed to transcend the ancient world, continuing to spin its way through cultures and time periods, quietly finding its place in our modern lives. And yet, despite her transformation into a symbol of defiance and creativity, it's important to remember that Arachne was also a victim, a person who was punished for doing exactly what she was good at. This tension between victimhood and power is what makes her such an enduring figure. It's a paradox that runs through art, history, and our own lives. We too often find ourselves trapped between being celebrated for our talents and being criticized for the very things that make us unique. It's a struggle that persists even today in the world of modern artists, writers, and creators. But as Arachne's myth weaves through the ages, it's not just about her defiance. It's about how she's been reinterpreted, reimagined, and, ultimately, redeemed by later generations. She's become something more than the object of Athena's wrath. She's become a symbol of the resilience of the human spirit, an embodiment of the creative force that refuses to be silenced. You see, Arachne's web doesn't just trap her, it becomes her voice. In this modern reimagining, she spins not just a web of fate, but a web of connection, uniting people across time and space through the threads of shared experience. Her story is one of struggle and triumph, defeat and reclamation, a tapestry of contrasts that reflects the complexities of life itself. Take, for example, the way Arachne's image has been used in the context of modern feminism. Her story has been repurposed as a powerful metaphor for the challenges women face when they step outside traditional roles. Arachne becomes not just a victim of a jealous goddess, but a victim of societal expectations, and her story is one of reclaiming power. She is the artist who refuses to bend to authority, who asserts her right to create, no matter the cost. In a way, Arachne's enduring relevance in feminist discourse speaks to the larger truth of her myth. The more the world tries to bind her, the more she escapes. Each time the web is woven, it seems to become more complex, more intricate, and more impossible to destroy. In the process, Arachne, once a mere mortal, is transformed into something greater, a figure that embodies the very spirit of rebellion and creativity. But as her image continues to evolve, so does the nature of the struggle. The web that she spins becomes a metaphor for the networks we build today. In an age dominated by social media, Arachne's web now resembles the connections we form across the globe. We, too, are artists of sorts, weaving our own threads of influence, creativity, and expression. And like Arachne, we find ourselves caught in the very web we create. It's a curious, somewhat melancholic thought. As you lie there, eyes heavy, with sleep you might begin to wonder, are we all just weaving our own webs, trying to find meaning in the tangle of life? And if so, what happens when our web is challenged, when it's torn apart by those who think they know better? Do we fall like Arachne, punished for daring to create? Or do we find a way to reclaim the threads and spin something new? As the last remnants of Arachne's story settle over your mind, there's a softness to it, a quiet, reflective feeling. Arachne, in her spider-like stillness, teaches us to embrace our own creativity, to stand firm in the face of judgment, and to recognize that even in our struggles, there is beauty. As you drift off, the images of webs, tapestries, and mythical figures fade into the quiet background hum. The story, like Arachne's threads, continues to spin, gently pulling you into a peaceful slumber where myths, art, and dreams all intertwine. As your thoughts begin to soften into the twilight space between wakefulness and sleep, the world around you feels quiet, almost serene, as if Arachne's story, woven through time, has made its home within the very fabric of your mind. Her tale, as winding as the threads she once spun, has now settled into a peaceful rhythm, threading through your consciousness like a quiet lullaby. But while we've explored Arachne's fate, her legacy, and the ways in which she's been transformed into a symbol of defiance, there's one aspect of her myth that still lingers, a subtle undercurrent that ties it all together. It's the idea of the contest, that moment where Arachne, young and brash, challenges Athena in the first place. And in that challenge, we see something more than just the seeds of punishment. We see an essential part of what it means to be human, the desire to prove oneself, to test the boundaries of one's own ability. After all, Arachne's fate wasn't sealed simply because she wove better than the goddess. No, her true crime, at least in Athena's eyes, was her audacity. She didn't just weave to create beauty, she wove to compete with the divine, to stand beside a goddess as an equal. That, to Athena, was unthinkable. But it's this very act of competition that makes Arachne's story relatable, even today. We've all felt it, haven't we? The urge to push ourselves to be more than we are, to test the limits of our abilities. Whether it's an artist striving for perfection, a writer pushing their words to new heights, or even just someone at work trying to prove their worth in the face of impossible standards, there's a part of us that wants to stand beside the divine, and in doing so, we risk it all. What makes Arachne's story so deeply ingrained in our minds, then, is not just her punishment, but her defiance of the divine, her refusal to be contained by the godly hierarchy. She wasn't content to accept the roles assigned to her. She had to compete, to push back against the unspoken rules that govern art, that govern life. Perhaps that's why, over time, her myth has been rewritten in so many ways. Perhaps that's why we keep revisiting her story, because in some small part, we recognize her act of defiance. We see ourselves in her challenge. We too want to prove that we are more than what society expects of us, more than the roles we're assigned. And in that defiance, we too find meaning. It's interesting to note how Arachne's story has resonated through different times and places, often taking on new meanings depending on the culture in which it's told. In the Renaissance, for instance, the focus wasn't just on Arachne as a victim or a rebel. Instead, her challenge was seen as a mirror of the artist's struggle against the conventions of the time. Artists like Titian and Raphael, who were masters of their craft, didn't just paint beautiful images, they used their work to challenge the established rules of art. They were, in their own way, echoing Arachne's defiance, using their creativity to challenge the divine order of artistic tradition. Fast forward to the 20th century, and we find that Arachne's defiance continues to serve as a metaphor for the modern artist, the person who must navigate a complex web of expectations, critics, and self-doubt. From Dadaism to Surrealism, artists continued to embrace chaos, subverting traditional forms of expression and challenging the status quo. In this sense, Arachne's myth is timeless. It's not just about weaving, it's about the struggle to break free from the constraints placed upon us, whether by gods or by society. As you drift deeper into sleep, you might find that this theme, the theme of testing one's limits, of daring to compete with the divine, of reaching beyond what's expected, lingers in the quiet recesses of your mind. And perhaps as you rest, you'll realize that you too are a part of this ongoing web of creation and rebellion. Whether you're consciously aware of it or not, every moment you create, whether it's a thought, a word, or a deed, adds to the tapestry of human experience, just as Arachne's web added to the vast canvas of mythology. You begin to feel more connected to the story, as if Arachne herself is no longer a figure confined to ancient myths, but a presence woven into the very fabric of your own existence. The threads, both hers and yours, overlap and intertwine. There is no separation, only creation. And just like that, with her story softly fading into the distance, the weight of your day lifts, leaving you with a quiet, peaceful understanding. You are, after all, part of something much larger than yourself. A tapestry that stretches across time and space, full of creativity, defiance, and beauty. As you rest, the gentle weight of sleep begins to wrap you in its embrace. But Arachne's web is still with you, woven intricately into the soft backdrop of your mind. You might not be consciously thinking of it, but in the quiet recesses of your thoughts, something about her story lingers. Perhaps it's the rhythm of her weaving, the way she sat there, determined, hands moving swiftly and precisely, her mind focused only on the task at hand. Maybe it's the sheer human spirit that comes through in her defiance, the refusal to be small, to be bound by invisible threads of limitation. It's interesting, isn't it? How these ancient myths, with their gods and monsters, still hold such relevance today. We live in a world of our own creation, one shaped by technology, media, and the endless hustle. Yet Arachne's defiance still resonates deeply because we too are constantly grappling with the same things she did. The need to prove ourselves, the desire to be recognized, the drive to stand alongside something greater, whether it's a god or a system. And then there's the quiet truth that Arachne's myth also teaches us. The danger of competition, the price of pride. She didn't simply compete with Athena because she wanted to prove she could make a better tapestry. No, her challenge was a question of value. It was a bold statement that the gods and mortals weren't so different after all, that the weaving of a human could stand on equal footing with the work of a deity. But it's this very questioning of hierarchy that sets Arachne apart from the typical hero's journey we usually hear about. There's no epic battle to save the world, no divine purpose driving her actions. She's simply an artist, a creator, who dares to stand in the same space as a god. It's not about what she wins or loses. It's about the audacity to exist, to compete. In many ways, Arachne's story is a quiet meditation on the human condition. It's about what happens when you put your heart and soul into something that matters to you, only to have someone, something, higher than you decide that your effort isn't enough. It's the story of artists everywhere who work tirelessly, trying to capture something that will make them feel whole, only to have the world refuse to see it in the same light. And yet, it's also about the resilience it takes to keep going. Arachne may have been turned into a spider, but her ability to weave, to create something out of nothing, remains her defining characteristic. Even in her punishment, she is still an artist. Even when she's trapped in her own web, her creativity remains as sharp as ever. And in a way, isn't that what all of us, artists, creators, thinkers, dreamers, hope to achieve? To have our creativity, our work, and our voices remain in the world, even when we feel caught in the webs of doubt, criticism, or even failure. This theme of creation and destruction, of defiance and submission, has fascinated many over the centuries. Even now, in a time when creation is everywhere, from the internet to the fine arts to everyday people expressing themselves in countless ways, Arachne's story still resonates. The competition between herself and Athena, the way in which her creativity both empowered and ultimately led to her downfall, mirrors the delicate balance between confidence and humility, ambition and caution that we all try to navigate. And, when you think about it, Arachne's transformation into a spider is, in a way, a perfect symbol of the modern artist. Spiders weave webs not just for survival, but for creation, for meaning. And in that web, they leave something behind. Even if no one notices at first, even if their work is imperfect or misunderstood, it remains. Just as Arachne's tapestries, woven with human hands, continue to be seen and admired centuries later, so too do the efforts of those who create today. Whether it's a song, a poem, a painting, or a fleeting thought shared on social media, every piece of creation leaves a trace. Ya may start to notice that as you rest here, the notion of being caught in a web is starting to feel less like a punishment and more like an inevitable part of the process of creating. Just as Arachne wove, so do we, one thread at a time, perhaps without knowing exactly where it will lead. We are all creators, weaving our own paths through the world, entangled in the beautiful and sometimes messy designs we leave behind. Perhaps it's this idea of creative endurance that allows Arachne's myth to transcend time, from the ancient world to the modern day. She is not just a figure of myth, she is the representation of the artist, no matter the era, no matter the medium. Her struggle is our struggle. Her triumph is our triumph. She tells us that no matter how tangled our web becomes, no matter how tangled we may feel in our lives, the act of creating is a powerful, enduring thing. And as your thoughts slow and fade, you can almost picture the threads of Arachne's web, stretching across time, connecting artists, creators, and dreamers throughout history, each one adding their own unique piece to the tapestry. As you begin to sink deeper into sleep, the image of Arachne's web seems to stretch further and further, expanding across centuries and cultures, like a vast and delicate network of creativity. You might notice how, even as Arachne's tale has been retold and reinterpreted over the years, there's an essential truth that endures. The artist's struggle to express themselves, to stand tall beside the gods of their craft, is timeless. That thread of desire, that longing to create something that will leave a mark, is part of what connects us all, whether we're painters or poets, writers or sculptors, or even just dreamers trying to make sense of our lives. And while Arachne's punishment could have left her broken, trapped in an endless cycle of spinning and weaving, there's something more to it. Her story isn't just about suffering, it's about transformation. Arachne's web, once seen as a symbol of defiance against Athena, becomes a symbol of resilience and adaptation. She learns to embrace the very thing that was meant to punish her, and in doing so, she finds a new form of power. The spider, once a creature of solitude, now has its own form of agency, spinning webs of both beauty and purpose. This, in many ways, mirrors the journey of so many artists and creators throughout history. For every person who has ever faced criticism, rejection, or self-doubt, there's a certain comfort in knowing that even the greatest artists faced their own webs of struggle. Even Arachne, in her transformed state, becomes a creator in a different form, turning her punishment into her greatest strength. Think of all the artists, poets, musicians, and thinkers who have found themselves in similar situations. Those who have faced rejection or misunderstood their work only to find new paths forward. It's in the struggle, in the act of creating, where the true magic happens. As the world changes, so too do the ways in which creativity is expressed. And just like Arachne, every creator must find their own balance between artistic freedom and societal expectations. Arachne's legacy, in many ways, teaches us that creativity isn't always linear. Sometimes it takes unexpected forms. Just as her transformation into a spider allowed her to weave her own fate in a completely new way, artists throughout history have found innovative methods of expression, breaking away from tradition to find new ground. In this sense, Arachne becomes not just a figure of myth, but a symbol of every person who has ever dared to make something new, something that challenges the status quo, something that invites others to see the world in a different light. And here, as you lie on the edge of sleep, it becomes clear that we all have our own webs to spin. Not everyone will see our creations, and not everyone will understand them. But in the act of weaving, of creating, we find something incredibly valuable: our own voice. Just as Arachne was forced to spin, she still had the power to choose the patterns and designs of her web, making it uniquely hers. The same is true for us. Even in the face of challenges or adversity, there is always the chance to create something that speaks to who we are. Arachne's transformation into a spider also offers us something else, an opportunity to look at our own creations with a different perspective. When you take a step back and look at your own work, whatever it may be, you may see it from a different angle. What may have once felt like a failure or a mistake can now be seen as part of your personal journey. Each thread, each twist, adding to the story of who you are becoming. As Arachne spins her web, she doesn't just create art. She creates something meaningful, something that continues to resonate across time. And you, as you slip further into sleep, might start to feel the same way about your own creations. The struggles you face, the challenges you endure, are just part of the process. You too are weaving a story, one thread at a time. In the quiet of your mind, you may begin to feel the weight of the day lift away, the threads of your own web gently spinning themselves into place. Each moment, no matter how small, is another. Part of the larger pattern, another step toward a future yet unwritten. Arachne's story has woven itself into the fabric of your thoughts, reminding you that no matter where you are, no matter what you're creating, there's always room to grow, to adapt, and to spin your own web. With that peaceful thought, you drift further into sleep, knowing that Arachne's spirit, her creativity, her defiance, her resilience, is part of the greater web that connects us all. The struggle may be long, but in the end, there is always beauty in what we create. And, like Arachne, we too can find strength in the very thing that once sought to bind us. As you continue your descent into restful slumber, Arachne's myth lingers, not as a punishment, but as an invitation. The image of her spinning, weaving intricate designs in the silence of her web feels strangely soothing. Perhaps it's because her story, her defiance, her transformation, her ongoing creativity reminds us that we are all, in our own way, continually spinning our own webs, however tangled they may become. As you rest here, it's important to pause for a moment and reflect on what we've learned from Arachne's journey. Though it began with rivalry, competition, and even punishment, it has blossomed into a tale of empowerment and creativity. Arachne didn't just succumb to her fate as a spider. No, she adapted. She found purpose in her transformation, in the very thing that was meant to diminish her. And that, I believe, is where her true strength lies. Think of the countless times in your life where you've faced a setback, where things didn't go as planned, where you felt trapped in a situation beyond your control. It's easy to believe that those moments define us, that the struggles and frustrations are all that matter. But Arachne's myth reminds us of something vital. Even in those moments of feeling stuck or punished, there's always room for growth. She, too, was trapped in a seemingly endless cycle of weaving, yet it became her art, her strength, her legacy. So, too, can our moments of struggle transform into something beautiful, something uniquely ours, when we look at them through a different lens. Just as Arachne took the power of her punishment and turned it into an enduring symbol of creativity, we too can learn to harness the challenges in our lives. When we find ourselves at our lowest, when we feel most entangled in the webs of our own making, we can remind ourselves that we still hold the tools to create, to adapt, and to move forward. We don't have to stay stuck. The web we're weaving is always in progress, and every new thread is an opportunity to learn, to change, and to evolve. But Arachne's story also brings us back to the idea of competition, the desire to prove ourselves. Perhaps the reason her myth resonates so strongly, even today, is because it speaks to the universal drive to show the world what we are capable of, to stand beside the gods and prove our worth. Arachne didn't set out to destroy Athena. She set out to make her mark, to show that the artistry of humans could stand on equal footing with that of the divine. And in doing so, she didn't just challenge the gods, she challenged herself. Isn't that what we all do in our own way? Whether it's through work, relationships, or creative pursuits, there's an inherent desire within us to stand tall, to be recognized, and to prove that we are capable of greatness. And while that desire can sometimes lead to frustration or conflict, it also drives us forward. Arachne's challenge to Athena was more than just an act of defiance. It was an act of personal growth. In testing her limits, she learned more about herself and her abilities than she could have ever imagined. It was her very struggle that transformed her, both physically and symbolically, into a powerful figure in mythology. As you drift deeper into rest, it's not hard to see how Arachne's myth, like so many others, reflects the universal themes that connect all of us. Her story, filled with art, ambition, and transformation, is one that continues to speak to anyone who has ever dared to create, to challenge, or to defy. And as the night deepens, you might begin to see her not just as a character in a myth, but as a representation of the quiet, resilient part of yourself, the part that doesn't give up, even when the path ahead is uncertain. The quiet weaving continues in the background of your thoughts. And perhaps as your body relaxes deeper into sleep, you'll realize that Arachne's web is not just a symbol of her struggle, but also of your own. You, too, are weaving something in this world, even if it's hard to see at times. And while the outcome may not always be clear, every thread you weave contributes to something larger than yourself, a pattern that stretches through time, connecting creators, dreamers, and wanderers like you. And so, as you let go of your thoughts, surrendering to the peaceful quiet of the night, Arachne's story, her struggle, her creativity, her defiance, becomes a gentle reminder that every challenge, every moment of doubt,
is a part of the greater tapestry of life. You, like Arachne, are part of something much larger than yourself, and though the threads may sometimes tangle or fray, they are always moving, always growing, always being woven into the story of who you are. With the warmth of this thought, your body feels lighter, your mind more at ease, and the night wraps itself gently around you like a soft blanket. The web, Arachne's web, and your own, are woven together now, tangled beautifully in the quiet spaces of your mind. As the final moments of your journey towards sleep unfold, the myth of Arachne, her defiance, and her transformation continue to echo in the soft corners of your thoughts. In these last quiet moments, with your body heavy and your mind slowing, it's a gentle reminder. Like Arachne, we all create, we all struggle, and we all find our own ways to adapt. The myth weaves its way deeper into your consciousness, leaving behind the sense that perhaps, like Arachne, you too are part of something bigger. You may not have a loom or the ambition to compete with gods, but there's something universal about the drive to express, to leave a mark, to find beauty in the struggle. The image of Arachne, now a spider, weaving her intricate patterns with endless patience, becomes more than just an ancient myth. It becomes a mirror to your own life. You might not feel like a god and certainly not a goddess, but in your own quiet moments of creation, whether that's through work, relationships, hobbies, or even the small things you do each day, you are making your own mark on the world. Like Arachne's webs, your actions too are full of complexity, meaning, and purpose. And as you rest now, feeling the day's weight slowly lift, consider this. The web is never truly finished. It's an ongoing process. Each moment, each thread, each action is part of something larger. The world doesn't always see or understand the work you do, just as the gods didn't understand Arachne's art. But that's not what matters. What matters is the act of creating, of expressing, of continuing to weave, even when the path seems unclear or uncertain. And in the quiet, as you relax more deeply, you can almost feel the threads of your own life intertwining with those of countless others, from Arachne in ancient Greece to the modern-day dreamers and creators. No matter where you are or what, you are creating. You are connected to this vast web of humanity, a silent yet strong thread running through time and space. Your creativity, your thoughts, your actions, they are all woven into something larger, something that stretches beyond the present moment. As your mind begins to quiet and the last of your thoughts drift away, there's a peaceful acceptance of the truth that we are all part of a never-ending tapestry, one woven by the hands of countless individuals who, like Arachne, continue to create, defy, and adapt. The web grows silently, each moment contributing to the greater whole. So let the quiet of the night fill you. Let your thoughts become softer, lighter, until the last lingering image of Arachne and her webs fades into the tranquil peace of sleep. Now there is nothing left to do but rest. Just like Arachne, you too can find comfort in the knowledge that everything is connected, that every action, every decision, and every creation matters, even when it feels like no one is watching. So, as you slip deeper into sleep, wrapped in the calm rhythm of your breathing, let go of the day and allow yourself to rest. The web of dreams is gentle, soft, and waiting for you. End of script. Sweet dreams.